Welcome back to Repat Stories, where we travel the world through the stories of others. Today we are in the beautiful country of Antigua and Barbuda, but specifically Antigua, and we are talking to Miss Fayola Jardine today. And she's going to tell us about her time in growing up in Antigua and being away and now being back. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so as you know, this show takes the form at home, away, and then home again. So tell us about growing up in Antigua. What was that like for you?
Growing up in Antigua, well, as a child, I have asthma. So I got diagnosed with asthma when I was like 2 years old. So as a child, I didn't really get to play as much as children do because, I was always in and out of the hospital. But if I had to go down memory lane, I would say my childhood was full of mangoes and pineapples and trips to the beach with my family and bike rides when my dad taught me how to ride my first bike. And so I did have, despite my medical issue, I did have a really fun childhood in Antigua. I remember independence celebrations, marching for my school. So, that was the typical Antiguan upbringing, I would say. And yeah, I have good memories, fond memories.
Yeah. And so did you grow up more in like the town area or like out of town, or a bit of both?
Well, I lived in various places, but it was always town.
Okay.
Although my father wished we had grown up in the country, because he used to love to say he would love us to be able to just run barefoot up and down the fields and, But we were a town family. The first place I remember living was with my great aunt Pearl, who was related to us from my father's side. And so we had lived with her for a short while. And then I lived with my great-grandmother, who I absolutely to this day adore. May her soul rest in peace. She was most definitely the matriarch of our family. And, she died, I don't even know how long ago. But her memory still lives on in us. And in each of the family members, you can see a bit of her personality, which is really sweet. She taught me how to make bakes. And she used to say to me, she used to love when I put her bread in the oven to get the top crisp so that I could pull out the pet. And, sometimes I got distracted, children get distracted, and I would burn the bread in the oven. And she would say, "You're never going to get married, because you're always burning my bread." And I'm not married yet. So,
oh my gosh.
But I stopped burning bread, so I don't know. But yeah, we lived close to the St. John's Market, so I have memories of going to the market with my mom, and meeting, other elders in the community who you found that everybody basically looked out for everybody else. So you're going to the market and you're not feeling as though you're buying fruits and vegetables from strangers. I remember there was a lady, Miss Mabel. I don't think she was related to us, but I remember being a child thinking she was probably my aunt because you had that kind of community. And so I was a town girl.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so were you an only child?
No, I'm the first of four.
First of four.
Yeah, I have 3 siblings, 2 sisters and a brother.
Okay, that's amazing. And so do you think growing up that your upbringing was more a middle class, or like what type of and what does that mean in Jamaica? Like what's not Jamaica, in Antigua. So sorry. What is it like here? I have no context. So you have to tell me what are things that we're used to.
I think I would have considered myself, to be honest, I am no expert on classes. Right? But we weren't poor in the sense that, there were others who would have been a lot less fortunate. I considered myself, even as a child, to be fortunate. I had my mom, I had my dad, I had my grandmothers, both of them. I had my great-grandmother, I had my grandfather. So we were surrounded by a lot of family. We were always taken care of. I don't remember growing up and being in lack. Yes, as a child, you might go and you say, "Mommy, I want this toy. Daddy, I want this." And the answer might be no. But it didn't feel like a no because there was lack. It just felt like, no, you can't get it, you know? It could, maybe because, especially back in the day, there was this thing where you had to tell children no so they know what that felt like, And so I felt taken care of. I feel like a lot of the people I grew up around, the schools I went to, had a mix of, children from different backgrounds. So you had maybe kids who had expat parents, kids who were local, or kids who maybe their families were Antiguan born, but maybe partially raised in the US and now coming back, and things like that. So that was the environment that I was embedded in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. And so you're coming up, you're graduating fifth form, and you're thinking about what you want to do for school. What do you want to do for school? What's happening?
What I wanted to do for school when I was graduating fifth form was get out of Antigua. I felt like, I always had an interest in the arts and in literature. So in my subjects, the things that came most easily to me were English language, English literature studies, history, arts, anything artsy and creative. I was really good at that. And I fought to get good grades in things like biology, chemistry, and physics. That was just not my vibe. But that was the direction that my parents pushed me into. Because, you're growing up and you come from a society where your parents want their kids to they want their kids to advance beyond what they've been able to accomplish. And even though my parents were, doing well for themselves, my mom was an accounts clerk, and my dad was is an electrical engineer, and he also does computer programming. And so, they work together to sustain us, to sustain their family. But they try to push you towards the things that seem to make money and make a bigger life and a better life. And so those things at the time would have been the sciences and accounting and business related subjects. But boy, it was just not my thing. And I think I was too young to recognize that, my talents were in this direction. So this is the direction I should go into. And so for a very long time, my talents of spoken word and poetry and acting and things, those things were dormant. Even though I might have had this, creative personality, always a bit dramatic, it never really set in my mind that it could become more than just a hobby, until later down in life.
Okay. So before you got into your creative bag, you had the opportunity to get a scholarship?
Yes, so I got a scholarship from the Antigua and Barbuda government. Well, you could either get the scholarship from the Antigua and Barbuda government, or you could get it from the Tim Hector Foundation, which was also giving scholarships to go to Cuba to study. And so I was encouraged by my father to pursue IT, because that was what he was into, and I was good at that at school as well. That was one of the subjects that I got good grades in as well. And so it just felt like a natural progression to go in that direction. But when the scholarship came, the list to go and study IT was too long. So I would have had to wait a year. I waited the year, and during that time, I went to State College, Antigua State College, for a year. And strange enough, I was studying history, English language, literature, IT, politics, that kind of stuff. And spent a year doing that. And then when it came around again for the scholarships, it was still, the list had not reached my name to say, okay, you could go off for IT. And I had an uncle who thought I would make a brilliant neurosurgeon. And there were medical scholarships available. And he said, go to Cuba, study medicine, become a doctor. I always watch you growing up. You have an eye for details, which I do, but not those types of details. But I was 17 by that time, and I just wanted to have an outside experience. I wanted to travel and just have an experience outside of my Antiguan upbringing. And I was very anxious for that. And so I was like, okay, I'll go to Cuba, I'll study medicine. you know, ignoring, I think, at the time, my natural talents once again. Because even in state college, there was my politics teacher, Mr. Winter. He realized that there were a lot of kids in his class who were very creative and artistic, and a lot of us who wrote poetry. Now, I'd been writing poetry since I was, I don't know, maybe 13 years old. In high school for Valentine's Day, I used to write poems, and I used to make cards for my friends to give to their boyfriends. I should have charged, but I didn't. You know, and so I was always doing that. I had a poetry book, and I used to write lyrics for songs, and so I was doing that for years. But it felt at that time like just an outlet. You know, teenage angst needs to get out, and sometimes parents aren't, they're not willing to listen. You know, do as I say. Even though my parents are very kind, you still have that, you know, the parental guidance coming out of them more often than not. And so my way of getting it all out was writing it in poetry. And so Mr. Winter saw that he had quite a few of us in the class. And so he created a club for us. And so we would meet every week, maybe once or twice a week. And it was just basically us, you know, expressing ourselves to each other in a room.
You had a salon.
Yes. So we had a room of like-minded individuals, and we're all expressive. And he used to encourage us to be as expressive as we wanted to be. He was non-judgmental. He was very open. He was like, if y'all want to use bad word, use it too. Get it out. You know?
Is he alive?
He is.
Big up Mr. Winter.
Big up Mr. Winter. So, yeah, so I would say he is the first teacher that really encouraged and pulled that out of us. And he was teaching politics, right? But he saw that, and he realized that it would have been so useful for all of us. And he himself wrote poetry too, so he would share with us. And we had a wonderful time. It was amazing. And then one day I got a call from my principal at the time, A-levels principal, Mrs. Hamilton, if I remember her name correctly. And I thought I was in trouble. I was like, what have I done? I'm a good girl. I didn't do anything wrong. But she was calling because the school was having a program. And she wanted me to come and perform a poem. And Mr. Winter is the one who told her, you know, contact Fiola. Fiola writes some really good stuff. And I was nervous out of my mind. I'm talking about me being 17, standing up on a stage in front of a room full of my peers. And I did it. It was really good. I was scared out of my mind, but I came off the stage with something else. I came off with some sense of self. Like, you know, I never imagined I would stand up on a stage and do something like that. Anyway, fast forward, I end up in Cuba. Never did any poetic performances or anything of that sort in Cuba. I'm in Cuba struggling through med school.
Okay.
And
wait, pause.
Yeah.
Pause. Because before you're actually in Cuba, on the way to Cuba,
Yeah.
Your mom had to convince you to bring your medication?
Oh, yes. So I was diagnosed with asthma when I was 2. And I actually remember my parents taking me on a trip to Germany, right? Because my father worked for the British Broadcasting Company, and he had to go to Germany for work-related reasons. And so he took me and my mom. It would have been just me at the time.
Okay.
So we went, and I remember them telling me a story about me being in a bedroom, just, you know, wheezing and not feeling good and being fretful as a 2-year-old. And there was this vent, and they put me under the vent, right? And that's what calmed me down, kind of calmed my breathing, just having my body feeling cooler. Now in Germany, I would expect it's cold, but I don't know what time of year it was, and I don't know quite why I was 2. I wouldn't know why I was fretting, but so I had that memory, right? And coming back to Antigua, my whole childhood. So at the time, it was the Halberton Hospital. My whole childhood, I was in and out of the hospital. I missed out on so much school growing up because always getting these asthma attacks, ended up being kept overnight at the hospital. I would have spent, you know, weeks at a time at the hospital. And Yeah, so they labeled me a chronic asthmatic, to the point where when you showed up to the hospital, you had to go to the reception to give you information. They knew everything about me. They knew my name, they knew my birth date, they knew where I lived. Anything that they needed to document, my mother never had to stop and say, okay. They just looked and said, Fiola, you again? You know, so I spent a lot of time growing up in the hospital, I would say, you know, and being at school and not being able to play sports to the best of my ability because, you know, I can't breathe properly. Even though I consider myself to be somewhat athletic, because I play tennis, and growing up I would have played tennis, basketball, volleyball, different things, but always having to make sure that that inhaler was very close by. You know, so there had to be an inhaler in my bag, an inhaler in the car, an inhaler in my room. So anywhere I was, there had to be easy access to an inhaler. And so, you know, so I think I was 15 when I realized I wasn't getting asthma attacks anymore. I was over the moon because I was sick and tired of the medication. And a lot of the medication was steroidal. So I was like, yes, I'm done with this. I don't want, you know. And I had been asthma free for 2 years, 2 glorious years. No asthma, no hospital, no medication. I actually used to leave the house without an inhaler and be completely fine. And then when it was time for me to travel to Cuba, my mom said, you know, we need to make sure you have enough medication to last you for the year because you're not going to come back again until summer break. And I said, no, I don't have asthma anymore. I'm not asthmatic anymore. Why would I walk with medication? And she said, Faye, walk with it. You never know. You never know. And very begrudgingly, I said, fine. It's a good thing I was a child that listened to my mother and listened to my parents. And I got my medication and I packed up my suitcase and I packed it over in a corner because I didn't even want to see it, you know. And landed in Cuba 9 p.m. the night and had a full-blown asthma attack 11 p.m. the same night. Run into the same medication in the suitcase that I did not want to bring to get. And I was so... like, I was not happy about it. And that was a big part of my experience in Cuba as well. It was like going back to my childhood, always sick, always in the hospital. I mean, they took really good care of me in Cuba. They looked out for me. And, you know, they saw me as their responsibility because they used to tell us that. Y'all are students here, it's our responsibility to take care of you. So there were times I would miss so much school, and if you miss one class, it throws you so far behind. And so I'm missing 3 days, I'm missing a week. And so I would try to go to class even though I can't breathe properly. And there was a school nurse, and she would say, Fajola, you know, and she would warn me that, you know, you can't pretend to be okay, because I would try to run up the stairs to go to my room because you have to pass the nurse's office to get into the dorms.
They're trying to slip by.
I would try to slip by, but when I'm going up the stairs now, I would start to get that tension in my chest, and she just had an intuition for me. And she would come outside, and if I tú no puedes hacer eso, you know, she would scold me, and I would end up in the hospital. Basically, that's what would happen. And so I spent 3 years in Cuba. The first year being preparatory, where you learn Spanish. And so you learn to write and speak in Spanish. And you'd have learned subjects pertinent to medicine. Like, you'd learn some biochemistry, some biology. We learned a lot of history as well, and some psychology. And so did that. And then went into, so we moved from one school to another. And I don't know, I think it was a mixture of the climate, and maybe this second area we went to was a little bit dustier. But Feola was even more sick, because in the first school, which was in Moran is like a town in Ciego de Avila. And in Moran, I don't remember ever going to the hospital in Moran. I was asthmatic, yes, but fine. But then when I moved to Las Tunas, I think it just got worse. you know, and the weather was different there. So you wake up in the morning, it's freezing cold. Then by mid-morning, it's boiling hot. And then by 2 o'clock, it's raining. And then by 3 o'clock, it's hot again. And then at night, it's freezing cold again. So I think that back and forth as well in the weather really affected me. And I was in the hospital a lot. It didn't stop me from soaking in a lot of the Cuban culture, you know, because I did a lot of traveling. So I traveled to a lot of other provinces, like Camagüey, and you had Pinar and Havana and Matanzas. So I would have had friends, because they split us based on country and what you're studying. So I would have been sent to Las Tunas with the Antiguan medical students. But I would have had friends, like I had one of my closest friends, Zelda from Guyana. She was studying Matanzas. So I would go, and that was like 9 hours away. So I would travel to go and visit her and things like that. But at the end of the 3 years, it was just too much. I was missing too much school. I had to repeat a year. And then the topic came up of me switching provinces. But in order to do that, I would have had to take another year. And so it was just too much. And it was just like if the universe was saying, you're not supposed to be studying medicine. You went to Cuba, you got the Spanish, that's all you needed, time to get out. Spoke to my parents. And my dad was starting up his own, or I should say had started his own software development company, Data Management Solutions Limited. And he said, you know what if you go to Barbados, study for a year, get your IT certifications, come home, work with me, and then you can do your degree online, which is what I ended up doing.
All right, but before we get to Barbados, let's pause. Because how was that for you? How did it feel? You, based on what you've told me, you're very much a perfectionist, and you told me specifically you don't like people to think when you're stupid.
Yes, I do not like people thinking I'm stupid.
So tell me what that was like for you when you were there, and it wasn't because of your ability, but you weren't well. And so you had to be behind, and you actually left without doing what you needed to do. How did you process that?
It was tough. It was really tough, emotionally, psychologically. I remember there were days when, so in our school, they had some tennis courts, and I would wake up early in the morning and go to the tennis court, and I remember I used to pray. I'm like, why, God, why are you punishing me? I really want to do better. I know I can. And I remember feeling embarrassed because in my school, they put your grades. So it's not like if you get your grades emailed to you or you go and you pick up an envelope. It's public knowledge. So you would go down to the class. So let's say, for example, anatomy was my favorite subject. And you would go down to, let's say, the anatomy classroom. And outside on the board, you'd have everybody's names and their grades. So I felt like everybody knew I was failing. I was failing.
Not even the ID number, but the name?
No, your name, your full name, and your grade.
Oh, Lord.
Right? So I would get good grades in anatomy for the most part. But things like biochemistry and physiology and histology, as hard as I tried, it was just really, really hard to keep up. And I had some Cuban friends who tried to help me. Like they would come up and sit with me and try to get me caught up with the classes I'd missed. And I had other Caribbean friends. There was Anisha from St. Vincent. There was Anique from Antigua. There was Amika Breedy from Guyana. There were so many people. I don't know if they'd like me calling their names, but and Joanne, and they used to really look out for me. And they would say, okay, in order for you to study, we'll cook, so you don't have to cook. I had some really, really good people. As a matter of fact, there's Ulseth. She's still my bestie. She's Antiguan too. And she used to look out for me. So they used to say, okay, so that you don't have to worry about cooking, we will cook and you can go and study. So they really used to help me. And then there was this area, this study hall we used to have. And I used to drink coffee like crazy and stay up the whole night with them. So we'd be studying side by side. So it wasn't like if I was on my own. But try as I did. There were so many people. I can't call enough names. There were so many people that looked out for me when I was in Cuba. And I'm talking about Caribbean people from St. Lucia, people from Antigua, people from Guyana. Just
I
There's
love that
too
because
many.
imagine how much harder it would have been if you
Yes.
didn't have that support.
If I was all alone, I'd have probably left Cuba after the
early.
first year.
Yeah.
You know, but try as I might, you know, I try as I did, it just didn't work out. You know, I just could not get caught up. And on top of that, you're learning all of this in Spanish.
Yeah.
So it's not my native tongue.
Yeah.
Yes, I could speak Spanish fluently, but it's still a factor,
Yeah.
you know. And even the teachers, like teachers used to invite students to come over so they could have study sessions, you know. And there was an embryology teacher, there was my anatomy teacher. I think what was her name? Eliana Alonso, I think so. But you know, so it was like you had a support system of people who wanted to see you succeed. And if it's one thing in Cuba, as long as you show interest and you put your best foot forward, people, the teachers, the professors, they're very much the type of people to come and say, okay, we'll help you.
Yeah, they'll rally around.
You know, they'll rally around you. You just have to show the interest. You have to be active and be a part of the class, the team. Show that you need help. Once you're showing that you need that, they'll give that to you.
Yeah.
And so, but
it was hard, and
it was hard.
You told me that things like participation was graded as well. So being present, if you weren't there a lot of the time, almost all of that percent gone out the window.
Every day you're being graded.
Yeah.
Based on participation.
Yeah.
And they put a lot of focus on you being able to orate what you were learning. So yes, you had exams with the essays, but you had two types of exams. You had the exam where you sit down and you answer maybe 5 questions. And then you had this oral exam where they would just ask you all types of questions related to what you should know. And you would just have to express it. And you can't just answer a question and say A, B, C. No, you had to say the whole alphabet. You had to have a conversation about the content.
Yeah.
And so, I missed a lot of, and the medication I was on made it just made you feel out of whack. I could barely stay awake for a lot of it. Like I remember so clearly, there was this medication, there was this pill, it was this tiny. I think it was called ketotifeno. I only remember it in Spanish. And they used to tell me take half of it every 12 hours. And after I took it, I'd be knocked out cold for a minimum of 2 hours. Like to the point where if I tried to stay awake, my body would hurt. And that was the medication that kept me alive. Animophilin, theophylline. Like you have to know how bad it was if I can actually remember the names. You know. And so after a while it was just like, it's time to just cut my losses.
Yeah. And so I imagine your parents being supportive would have made a big difference, because if you are going through this on your own, and I know you to be like from what I know, like not a perfectionist, but like you have
I like my ducks lined up.
Right. Okay, you said it, right? And then no, this isn't happening, but no, your parents are supporting you, and your dad is giving you an option. He's saying, okay, this can happen. So how quick were you to jump on that, or were you still unsure?
No, I was quick to jump on it. I was like, okay, let's do this. Because it was more than enough time for me to recognize that this was not working. You know, and medical school would have taken 6 years plus the 1 year of prep. And here am I struggling in year 3, still in first year med, because I had to repeat the year. So I'm like, this is not working. I think the reason why I didn't speak up sooner is like there was this not wanting to disappoint, right? Not wanting to disappoint my parents, not wanting to disappoint this uncle who envisioned me being this neurosurgeon. And I can be a neurosurgeon, but I'd have to be acting, like doing something in theater or TV or something. But I didn't want to disappoint. And when my dad, stood up and said, listen, we recognize that you're struggling. This is another option. What would you like to do? And I was like, go home? How you mean? Yes, I go home. And so I left Cuba, went to Barbados. Studied in Barbados. Started my degree in Barbados at the same time that I was doing my certification. And then left so I graduated from the program at UE, and then came home, and then I had already started the online course in Barbados anyway, so I just went straight into that, and then I was working and studying at the same time, which that was another challenge in and of itself, because when you're studying online, I think at the time, I think people had the sentiment that it was easier. It was not.
No.
When you're in a class, and I function better in terms of learning when I'm around people in a classroom setting. You know, so being on my own and having to work on this degree by myself, all these late nights.
The accountability is hard.
And I pushed really, really hard, and I graduated with my IT degree, went up for my graduation, and you know, I felt exhausted. I was absolutely fatigued. And I remember showing up at the graduation and feeling like my head was in a bubble, because I couldn't really absorb everything, because I was just so tired. Because when you do your online course, well, when the course I did, you had the option, every class lasted 6 weeks. And you had the option at the end of the 6 weeks to take a break and then go in. I never took a break, because I just wanted to get it over and done with. And so I ended up, it was a 4-year degree, but because I didn't take breaks, I ended up finishing it in a little bit over 3 years. I finished it a little early. And I felt like I was, you know, those Daffy Duck cartoons with him sliding on a plate of ice or something. I felt like I was sliding to the finish line. I could not wait to be done and over with, to the point where the last 2 courses I had to do, I had to fight. Because I just wanted it to be over.
A senioritis.
I was like, I'm done. I'm done. I need a break, you know? And went up, graduated, and my teachers were like, oh, you're the one who finished in less than 4 years. Most people don't, because a lot of the people in the program, you had a lot of army people, people who had kids. And I was like, you know what? I'm not cut out for any more school. You know, I just needed a break. Because remember, I came straight from Cuba to Barbados and then doing that. So it didn't feel like I had any breaks in between at all. And so, and I graduated 2009.
Yeah. Amazing.
So long ago.
So tell me really quickly. So, having been in Antigua, having been in Cuba and Barbados, what are some similarities and differences between the 3 countries? And things that people wouldn't think are, like, obviously think about.
Well, of course, we know about Cuba and the embargo and the restrictions that come with that. And so one of the things I noticed in Cuba, we didn't have access to the things that we took for granted. So, for example, you go into the supermarket and let's say, for example, there's a particular type of cereal that you like. If you see it in there once, you're not seeing it in there again. You're not seeing it again. You know, another thing that was different was so they have, my vocabulary is failing me at the moment because I'm trying to remember what it was called. But basically, every Cuban family had these cards where they get rations at the end of every month, right? And so they would get necessities like bread, flour, rice, whatever. And then whatever they would need apart from that, they would, you know, get elsewhere. And I'd never seen anything like that before, you know. And it was, I don't think you would call it welfare, because it was mandatory. It was part of their
It wasn't because they were poorer.
Right.
It was just the government.
Right. It's the structure of the government, because yes, you have this embargo, and so you're not getting commodities imported in the same way that we did in Antigua, you know?
Which is a stance they took, that they should share all their wealth and whatever.
And then you had certain stores that, like the average Cuban couldn't shop in particular stores, couldn't get. So they had to, and there was a limit on electronics and things like that. And so, you know, that really opened my eyes to the things that as young people at the time we took for granted in Antigua, the kind of, you know, access to certain things that they didn't have. And that was a big difference. one of the similarities I noticed was the hospitality. Cuban people are very hospitable, very accommodating. They just want to know that you respect their culture, and you're like, so for example, in school, they used to have, different school events, and you just could not stay in your room. Like, they don't like you. You're staying in your room, you're isolating yourself. No, come and socialize. Come and socialize and be a part of the function, and so, because they're very community centered.
Yes.
So I thought that was really great. And Antiguans have been considered to be very hospitable as well. So I found that was a similarity, and very family oriented. And and one thing I loved about Cuba was the market. That was another similarity. That reminded me of home. You go to the market and you got everything. Fruits, vegetables, provisions, meats. First time in my life I ever went to a market and bought meat. Like, so, and it came with I got this sense of independence as well. At home you're doing everything is filtered through your parents.
Right.
And in Cuba, I grew up. I would say I grew up in Cuba. I matured and realized that I can take care of myself, that I'm my own individual. And I remember, funny story, the first summer I came back home from Cuba, and my parents are telling me where I can go, what I can do, what's my curfew. And I'm like, no, we need to have a family meeting. And I said to them, I can't be living like an adult while I'm in Cuba and then come home and revert into a child. And I've always been this way with my parents, that even as a grown woman, I have my own child. I don't live with my parents anymore. But I don't have a problem letting them know where I am, what I'm doing. I don't mind sharing with them. And so I remember being 18 and I said to them, I don't mind telling you where I'm going, what I'm doing, who I'm with. I will give you the whole breakdown. But this thing about can and can't, it can't work.